And now, for our Captain Adams VHS Pirate Ship special presentation.
Wait. Watch out for that blue ninja.
Which one? There's like 1,000 blue ninjas.
Ahoy there, mates. Welcome to the VHS Pirate Ship. Me and Little Creep here are just playing the little bad dudes. Quite literally.
Man.
Hey, grab that soda can.
I'm trying.
Oh.
I've always wondered why they use food as health refills in video games. I mean, I just took a ninja star in the face. How's a soda gonna help?
I don't know. I guess refreshment goes a long way.
Yeah, like a big gulp's gonna help an axe wound.
We almost got him. Anyways, mates, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently today on the VHS Pirate Ship.
You mean we're not going to be talking about movies?
We're going to be talking about miniaturized arcade cabinets. For some reason, I've been quite fascinated with them lately.
Neato! What was the first mini cabinet?
I don't know, Little Creep. I don't know. Maybe we should ask VC Arnold.
Yeah, he knows everything.
You almost got him. Don't worry about it. They're bad dudes. That's why it's called Bad Dudes.
Was that a Parenthood reference?
Yes, it was. Anyways, let's ask VC Arnold.
Yes, let's.
Hey, VC Arnold.
I am VC Arnold, and I am just a VCR. How the hell should I know about video games, idiot?
Gosh, new VC Arnold sure is snippy.
Yeah. He's very unpredictable lately.
Well, if he doesn't know the answer, how are we going to find out?
I don't know. I guess we're on our own. Well, mates, it's time to do some digging, and it's time to explore the world of miniature arcade cabinets. My fascination has grown too strong, and I can't just let it go. It's time to find out more about these damn little things.
I like them because they're just my size.
That's true. They are.
Yeah.
They're pretty fun, too. However, they're not all what they're cracked up to be.
Gasp! You mean it's all just hype and they actually really suck?
Yep. Well, let's find out. And let's go
into the Microverse! Wow, that was impressive.
Thank you. Enjoy the show.
Yarr.
Yes, the arcade, the haven of coin-operated amusements that's been in existence for decades, long before the invention of video games. But of course, they're most well known for video games and really hit their stride and their zenith of popularity throughout the 80s and 90s because of said video games. And the arcade became a booming market and was all the way up until the 2000s when the shitty future came crashing down and the popularity of the arcade dissolved into a puddle of nothing. So what once was a $1 million industry all but dried up, until recently when there was a reoccurrence of the interest in arcades. Yes, all over the country and dare I say the world, there have been new arcades just popping up in the form of retrospective nostalgic havens or trendy brew pubs. And it's not that I have a huge problem with these, but oh how the mighty have fallen, because these are certainly not up to the standards that the arcades were in their glory days. And it all comes down to one factor. You see, when the arcade was a booming market, it was considered an industry. And being an industry, it had an entire service industry to support this industry. Simply meaning that people who owned arcades back then knew how to fix the games if something went wrong.
Out of order!
And this was especially true for the pinball table aspect of the arcade, because when those things break, you better know what you're doing. Which is precisely my point. It would seem that most of the people who own these arcades nowadays don't really know how to fix things. But in all fairness, why would they know how to fix these things? I mean, they're part of an industry that is all but obsolete, and therefore the service department that supported it is gone as well. At least for the most part, you could probably find somebody who knows how to fix them, but man, that's gotta be a niche market. So therefore, owning an arcade nowadays might be neat and all, but man, there's a lot of problems that go with it. Certainly if these arcades have pinball tables, and they usually do, and speaking of usually, the pinball tables are usually broken in some form or fashion. Yeah, I imagine it must be pretty hard to own and operate an arcade nowadays. I mean, think about it. All the games you have are at least 20 years old, if not older. Yeah, you're running a business that's part of an obsolete market full of really old equipment that you don't know how to fix. I mean, the stones it must take to own an arcade nowadays. And as far as the brew pub arcade is concerned, most people who own these things don't really care about the arcade aspect of it. They just use the arcade as a trendy afterthought to get people in the door. And you know damn well they don't know how to fix the games. I mean, the beer might be okay, but you know the games are broken.
Hey, bro, come on down to Neckbeard's hipster brew pub and trendy arcade. Yeah, brah, it's totally unique, even though there's 1,000 places just like this. Oh, this place is great, brah. Check out the retro ambience. It's just like the 1980s, even though I was born in 97.
That's Neckbeard's trendy brew pub and hipster arcade, where the beer is too filling and nothing works.
Yeah, brah. Bluegrass bands every Saturday. Yeah, brah, I still hacky sack. Want to see my ferret? Yeah, brah. Let's go shopping for vintage clothing after this.
What's up, brah? Can I borrow everything?
Yeah, brah. It's Neckbeard's trendy brew pub and hipster arcade. Hey, brah. I think one of your pinball tables is broken, but that's okay. I don't know how to play it anyway.
That's Neckbeard's trendy brew pub and hipster arcade, where the beer is too filling and nothing works.
I'm not apologizing for that, but perhaps I am a wee bit off base here. After all, I am supposed to be talking about micro arcade cabinets. But you can't talk about them without talking about the long, sturgeon history of the arcade and also the arcade cabinet itself, which has had many variations and evolutions throughout the years, each of them clever in its own way to serve its own purpose. And for a time, the only place to play a video game was the arcade, though there was the Atari and ColecoVision and stuff like that, but let's face it, they just weren't the same and fell flat. But of course, as we know now, these home systems were successful, but they just weren't the same as the arcade experience. But there simply had to be a better way to bring the arcade experience home, and Coleco thought of such a way with the first miniature arcade cabinet, or rather cabinets, as in 1981 they released a whole slew of miniature arcade favorites. Yes, in 1981 Coleco released Pac Man, Frogger, and Donkey Kong as what they would call tabletop arcade games. And these were good choices too, because these three titles would go on to define arcade games throughout all of time itself. Yeah, I mean, even if you don't play video games, don't like video games, or give two shits about video games, you still know what these three video games are. Yeah, you got Frogger, which according to the cabinet art is about a frog who's late for a flight, then Pac Man, which is massively successful despite the fact that it's about a circle going around a maze. And of course, Donkey Kong is what cemented Mario into the video game culture and popular culture itself. These three titles helped make video games the massive market it became. And of course, it goes without saying that these three games were massively successful. But how about the tabletop versions of these games? Well, yes, they were successful. They sold very well. But were they arcade-accurate versions of the games? No, not really. But they were as good as it got back then, and they certainly were slightly better versions than the Atari and ColecoVision counterparts. Okay, so these kind of sucked too, but they were still neat to have, and I think a lot of people were swallowed up with the idea of having a miniature arcade cabinet in their homes. So the idea was there. It was successful. The technology existed. It was okay. The point is, the miniature arcade cabinet was starting to catch fire. Well, not literally, that would be immensely unsafe. I mean, they were getting very popular, and that popularity would seemingly never die. And these three original mini arcade cabinets are highly sought after by collectors today, and they go for some pretty high prices. And the concept of the mini arcade cabinet would not stop throughout the years. And companies are still cranking them out today with all different types of arcade favorites, and the technology has certainly evolved. But are they worth it? Are they any good? Is it more than just a novelty or just a clever gimmick? Well, today I'm going to start our expedition of miniature arcade cabinets, and we're going to get small in part 1 of what you could call a mini-series. So climb aboard, sit back, and enjoy, and join me as we go into the Microverse!
Prepare for miniaturization. Initiating the miniaturization sequence in 3, 2, 1. Initiate.
Miniaturize! 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 Miniaturize!
VHS Pirate Ship presents Into the Microverse!
So Coleco led the charge of the miniature arcade cabinet and certainly gave us a shit ton of them. And not only did they give us Frogger, Pac Man, and Donkey Kong, but also stuff like Dig Dug, Cubert, Galaga, you know, the whole shebang. And in 1983, Coleco would give us sort of a second wave of these, where the cabinet design was slightly different, with titles like Donkey Kong Jr. and Zaxxon. But then after that, the concept of the miniature arcade cabinet sort of just went away. No doubt, this was due in part to the rise of superior home video game systems, such as the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Master System. And the momentum these systems had certainly stole a lot of the thunder from the miniature arcade cabinet, and we wouldn't hear from them again until the 2000s. And the company Bandai would release a cadre of even more miniaturized arcade cabinets. And these would be mini models of your typical arcade favorites, such as Centipede, Defender, Cubert, and even Rampage. And would these games just be slightly less shitty versions of the 1981 mini cabinets? Well, these are actually really good versions of the games. Yeah, old Bandai certainly got it right, and we're sure as hell showing off the technology because these are very impressive versions of these games. And not only that, these are very aesthetically pleasing, and the sound effects are pretty much spot on, and the price point is very enjoyable at around $20 brand new. But how is the gameplay? Well, as we're going to talk about throughout this mini-series, the gameplay just is not there, and that's to be expected because look at these things. How are you supposed to comfortably play them? Just based on the design of these things, which is the point, that's the gimmick, they're miniature arcade cabinets, and therefore comfort takes a back seat, and it's impossible to play any of these games without some degree of awkwardness. Sure, I mean, of course they made the buttons bigger so you could actually play the game, but I mean, even if you were to scale with this thing, like a little mini person, like Midge Montana and Big Top Pee-wee, even that would be weird, because the buttons would be huge. But never mind. So logistically, they had to give up a little bit of form to have these things function. And we'll continue to dig into this a little bit deeper as the series goes on, because trust me, some of these games just do not play well. So anyways, Bandai released this new line of newly designed mini cabinets full of arcade favorites, and you can't talk about arcade favorites without talking about Pac Man and Frogger. Yep, just like Coleco decided that these two arcade heavy hitters would be perfect for the first arcade mini cabinets way back in 1981, Bandai decided that they would also be perfect for their first line of their own miniaturized arcade cabinets. And let's start off by talking about Pac Man. Pac Man! Okay, so most of us already know the story of Pac Man, and I'm not going to waste any time going into it, but for those of you who don't know, allow me to give you a little synopsis. Pac Man was released in arcades in 1980 and proceeded to take the world by storm. It was a mega deal, hugely popular, spawning multiple other video games based on Pac Man, its own Saturday morning cartoon show, merchandise galore, even a board game. And there was even Pac Man wallpaper. I should know, it was in my room when I was a kid. Pac Man was an ultimate hit, an instant classic, an arcade favorite to be sure. And so, soon as the concept of a miniature arcade cabinet started being thrown around, Pac Man was at the top of the list. It was in 1981 when Coleco first released it, and the same is true in the 2000s when Bandai got involved. And I should say, in the interest of accuracy, that Bandai was only partially involved in the release of the first wave of the miniature arcade cabinets. Yes, though I had said that Bandai had released a cadre of miniature arcade cabinets in the 2000s, that statement wasn't entirely accurate. As you're about to find out, the miniature arcade cabinets that were released in the more recent years had multiple versions, each one newer and more evolved than the last. It seemed like every other year they were cranking out newer and more advanced versions of these. Each of these waves would have miniaturized versions of different arcade titles and simply rehash some of the other arcade classics as well, such as Frogger and Pac Man. Back to my original point, and as I had mentioned earlier, the first wave that was released in the 2000s wasn't released by Bandai alone. However, they were released with the permission and promotional help of Bandai. These were actually released by a company called Basic Fun Incorporated, which to me is a suspiciously obvious name, as if it were a front to some kind of drug cartel. But it's legit, and this company was primarily responsible for bringing the miniaturized arcade cabinet into the future. Which brings me to their release of Pac Man, and this sucks, and I'm going to enjoy telling you why. For one, take a look at the screen, and the fact that the maze is already pre-printed on it. You already know you're in for a pretty shitty time. This isn't for showcase purpose. This is not a sticker. This is the actual screen. But wait, it gets better. Let's check out the gameplay. Oh boy. Sit and marvel at the technology on display here. Though this might look like one on the surface, this is not a miniaturized arcade cabinet. This is just like one of those damn Tiger Electronics handheld games. I mean, for guacamole's sakes, I've had more fun spelling things on my calculator, like boobs, or boobies, or shoe, or shoes, or shoeless. And by the way, what do you call an out-of-work pimp? Holeless. All right. So let's check out the sound. Okay, the sound's not bad. Sounds pretty good, sounds almost like the original, but there's only one little thing wrong with it, and I'll show you. Okay, let's say you had to go take a leak, or you had to listen to somebody real quick, so you pause it. All of these things come with a pause feature, by the way, which is a nice touch. And when you normally pause a video game, as in pretty much all the video games that have ever existed, it goes quiet. But not this. Check it out. Oh my word, what is going on here? Not only does it play music for some reason, but it is so obnoxious. Thankfully, these things come with volume control, and if you can stomach playing this really shitty version of Pac Man, I recommend just turning the sound off. This is simply a terrible version of Pac Man, and a pitiful excuse for a miniature arcade cabinet. Hell, the 1981 Pac Man miniature arcade cabinet is better than this. I mean, not by much, but at least the screen on that one lights up. And I could understand if this was released in, say, 92 or 93, but no, this one was released way into the 2000s. There is no excuse for using this kind of dated technology. And here's the thing, and by the way, they also released Space Invaders with this same kind of groundbreaking technology. But at the same time, they also released Centipede and Frogger. Both of those had full-color light-up screens. So why did they do these two in the most shitty way possible? I just don't understand why you would do that. You know what? Never mind. Let's move on. Now, at this same time period, Pac Man would eventually have a re-release with a full-color light-up screen. And good old Basic Fun Incorporated would be responsible for most of these newer releases. It's important to point out that Basic Fun Incorporated would end up releasing two separate lines of these miniature arcade cabinets. There was the first line line, which included the really shitty versions of Pac Man and Space Invaders, and this would have multiple waves of title releases, such as Joust, Miss Pac-Man, Asteroids, Tetris, Q*berts, Breakout, and Galaga. And this line even included a redo, a mulligan, if you will, of Pac-Man, which this time included a fully illuminated and color screen. So thank you, Basic Fun Incorporated, for bringing Pac-Man to the 21st century. The titles included in this wave are rather primitive and basic versions of the games, but you really can't expect too much from these things. They are what they are, and hell, they're still better than the first version of Pac-Man. They are, however, fun to collect, basically because of the uniform cabinet design, which admittedly, they don't necessarily look like arcade cabinets, but they could do worse. Then as time rolled forth, Basic Fun Incorporated released a second line of arcade favorites, and this time, they were a little better. Yeah, these are pretty good versions of these games, and not to mention the arcade cabinet actually looks like an arcade cabinet. And this line included some titles you might not expect. Of course, they included the arcade standards like Q*bert and Miss Pac-Man and Centipede. And yes, a new and improved Pac-Man was included in this line, but it also included stuff like Spy Hunter and, as I had mentioned earlier, Rampage, which I was surprised to see because you don't typically hear about those two titles in any kind of conversation about arcade classics, even though they totally are. They're just not obvious choices for any kind of arcade classics collection. And this line of new and improved miniaturized arcade cabinets certainly included those obvious choices. And one of those obvious choices was Frogger. And this is a rather decent version of Frogger, but as we know, this is not the only version that Basic Fun Incorporated had released. They had released Frogger as part of their very first line of miniature arcade cabinets, right alongside the shitty version of Pac-Man. So is this version of Frogger as shitty as Pac-Man was? Well, let's find out. Let's talk about it. And let's talk about Frogger. Frogger! Released in arcades in 1981, Frogger proceeded to hop his little way into our hearts. Frogger was an instant hit and was almost as popular as Pac-Man. Like Pac-Man, Frogger had its own cartoon show. However, the merchandising just wasn't there. And also like Pac-Man, Frogger would prove that when it came to early video games, simplicity made money. And who would have thought that a game about a frog trying to cross a busy highway would be so popular? But it was, and still is, and anytime anyone talks anything about any kind of arcade classic, Frogger is always on the list. So it's no surprise that if a company were to produce a line of miniature arcade cabinets, Frogger would be on that list. Yep, as we know now, it was one of the first ever miniature arcade cabinets produced in 1981 by Coleco, and the same is true in the 2000s with Basic Fun Incorporated. And as I had mentioned, Basic Fun Incorporated had made not one, but two different Frogger cabinets. So let's take a look at Basic Fun Incorporated's first attempt at a Frogger mini arcade cabinet. Well, as you can see, it is rather primitive, but again, it's still way better than the shitty version of Pac Man.
Shitty version of Pac-Man. Version of Pac-Man. Version of Pac-Man.
And I might add that when it comes to these things, I'm not expecting much, but I am expecting way more than that version of Pac-Man. Sorry, it just really makes me mad. So anyways, this is a rather bare-bones version of Frogger, but it's still okay. It plays pretty smooth, but how about the sound? Not bad. Pretty accurate. But what happens when you pause it? Aha! You hear that, Basic Fun Incorporated? Nothing. There's nothing there. Nothing should be playing when a game is paused. You should have applied that to your shitty version of Pac-Man. Oh, there I go again. We're supposed to be talking about Frogger. So anyways, yeah, this is an okay version of Frogger. It's not spectacular by any means, but it is what it is. It is playable, it's not insufferable, and it is as delightfully difficult as the original Frogger was. As an arcade mini cabinet, this version of Frogger, and I'm being very generous here, isn't too bad. As primitive as this version is, the gameplay is decent, the sound is pretty good, and it's not awkward to play. However, and it should be noted here, that Frogger only requires a joystick to play it. So naturally, for a mini arcade cabinet, it's not going to be awkward to play. It's the games that not only require a joystick, but also other buttons to control them, is where the bumbling awkwardness comes into blossom. So games like Pac Man, Miss Pac Man, and Frogger are natural and logical choices for the small design of the miniature arcade cabinet. But it's the more complex and involved games that having miniature arcade cabinet versions of isn't such a hot idea. And we will most certainly continue to discuss that little factoid as this little mini-series rolls on. So be sure to hit subscribe and tune in to part 2 as we go further into the Microverse! And I'll see you as the adventure continues only on Captain Adam's VHS pirate ship.